Okay, Barbara, we are live.
Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. I am holding up this marvelous cover, and it's called Too Nice in Lisbon. And it's author Chris Pavone, who is joining us tonight virtually for, in fact, his only virtual event for this wonderful book. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Great to see you. And the lady in sunglasses who's posing as a tourist, I think, possibly in Lisbon. But joining us tonight is Karin Slaughter, who has just let me know that better she should be home rather than in Phoenix, given our heat. But she is coming to see us in August, possibly August 23rd for her new book. So that's really exciting. So Chris, this is his fifth international thriller. He is the Edgar-winning author of The Expats and has written The Accident, The Travelers, and The Paris Diversion. And if you follow his Instagram account, you can see photos that he has taken in many glamorous European places. But Chris, tell me before we start, what do you think an international thriller? How do you define international thriller? It's a term I use and I'm not entirely clear I know what it means.
It's a thriller that takes place internationally. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. There are all sorts of different types of thrillers in the world, as there are all the types of crime fiction, which is one of the things that I really love about reading in the genre that I work in. And a lot of international stories are very spy focused, and the spy focused stories tend to be about international affairs of one country or another, and people are trying to steal each other's secrets, and all of that was, I think, at its best during the Cold War. I don't write those types of books. Those types of political books are not, I like reading them, but I don't want to write them. My books are really much more like domestic suspense that happens to take place abroad. So it's whatever you like about domestic suspense plus some armchair travel. And I started writing these books when I lived abroad. I was an expat in Luxembourg in 2008 and 2009. And I got very excited about the idea of setting a book in an extremely boring place, which is Luxembourg. But you don't know that as people who haven't hung out in Luxembourg like I did for a year and a half. If you've been through for just a day and a half, you don't quite realize how boring it is. But I realized it, and I wrote a book about the non-existent, exciting part of Luxembourg.
My memory of Luxembourg is eating mussels somewhere over on the eastern border along the river that it shares with Germany, and they were delicious.
The Moselle.
Mm-hmm.
When we got to Luxembourg, the fanciest brasserie in town advertised that it had fresh seafood come in from the French coast twice weekly. And I was thinking, my God, it's from a different country. It's twice weekly. What makes that fresh or French?
Well, you used to be able to say that about Arizona, but now they fly it in every morning. And so we have a lot of great fish restaurants. Anyway, I asked Karin if we could do just a little wander through Lisbon, one of my personal favorite cities, before Karin takes over and talks to Chris about the excitement of this book. So one thing he says right up in front, with which I totally agree: 3 colleagues speak quickly in Portuguese, which sounds to Ariel is the woman at the heart of this novel, like Russian crossed with Spanish. Boy, that is so true. It's a Romance language, but it doesn't have the musicality of French or the ease of Spanish. Did you master any Portuguese? I never could get much beyond, good day or how to pronounce the pastries.
No, I didn't even try. I mean, I learned 15 things to say to not be rude, and I said them over and over again, please, thank you, hello. But other than that, when I was listening to sort of clips of Portuguese on my way to learning these words, I was thinking, I'm just not going to really do this very well. So I'm not going to really try. I feel like it's important to be able to say hello and thank you and please and excuse me wherever you go and whatever that language is. And I could do that in Lisbon, but I didn't want to go any further. And luckily, I really didn't have to. I mean, for better or worse, Lisbon, and I think Portugal in general, is a very tourist reliant economy, and lots of people speak lots of languages, and English is one of them. And especially in hotels and restaurants and museums, it's not a problem to not speak any Portuguese there. It's just, I think, a form of being polite to be able to say a couple of things. It's not necessary though.
So your characters did not have to master Portuguese in order to get through this story. I'm not denigrating Portuguese. I mean, it's an important language and there's some wonderful literature and stuff written in it. It's just never hit my own ear And so I'm always sympathetic when somebody else says that. One of the great things about Lisbon is it's a terrific food city. Rob and I once had, because he always faxes ahead, an 18-course lunch, and we ate in the kitchen with the chef, which was fabulous. But the thing that probably everybody thinks about when they're in Lisbon are the wonderful little pastries. And so you have a note there. The bakeries are all open, emitting different aromas, the butter and sugar richness of pastry from one and the flour and yeast from another. These European smells, which like sidewalk seafood markets and fresh juice vendors, are not part of life back home, meaning America. Were you smitten with the food and all the wonderful wandering through all the smells and markets?
Yeah, I love it. I love walking around a European city. I love the bakeries. I love the cafes. I love the way people are living their lives out on the sidewalks. I love sidewalk fishmongers, which is just an insane thing to think about in America. Would anybody actually put fish out on the street and sell it there? I think it's great the way the density of European cities allow for people to be interacting with each other in public all the time.
Well, Lisbon is famous for a particular kind of little pastry. It comes in like a tart shell. It's fairly small, has a lovely kind of custardy filling.
Yep.
It's been migrated to Brazil, but I mean, it's the thing to buy when you go to Lisbon. People get boxes of it like you get chocolate somewhere else and hand them out. They're delicious. So Chris has also mentioned two of my absolute favorite places. One is the Gulbenkian, which you describe as a brutalist Hulk, but passing past the architecture, I love the contents of it because Mr. Gulbenkian, who got started late, bought one of the best of almost everything. He didn't try for quantity, he tried for quality. And I think it's a really interesting museum.
I agree. It's a terrific museum. The
And-
Museum of Tiles is also a terrific museum. Lisbon is a great place to be a tourist. All in all, I think there's hands down one of my favorite cities to spend. You don't need a tremendous amount of time. 3 or 4 days will do it. It's extremely close to America, but we're not really here to be the Lisbon tourist board, right?
No, we're not. We can talk about the hills and we can talk about other stuff, but because it does play in, the geography does play in, at least to the front part of the book. But
Perfect.
Karin, why don't you take over and talk to us about what we could expect by reading 2 Nights in Lisbon?
Well, so I should say I'm wearing glasses. I had surgery on my eyeball. It's not because I'm awesome and cool, but I am. Strabismus, look it up. So Chris, how do I know you? Like, was it through our friend Kate White, or I don't remember how I met you.
I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure it was in New York.
Yeah.
It was
That would
probably
make
at
sense.
Thriller Fest, which are you going to in a couple of weeks?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but you were born in New York, is that right? Or
Yes, I'm from New York.
where you picked out that Southern accent?
Exactly. I've been working hard on it.
Yes. Where did you go to college? See, I'm trying to learn new things about you because when we're at dinner, usually we're talking about how our feet hurt and our back hurts and we're tired, all the glorious things that you would find at the Algonquin Round Table.
Exactly. We're
Yeah.
really literary superstars. You'll be glad to know I have a new foot problem. It's like tendonitis, except it has extra syllables in it. So it's tenosynovitis.
Wow.
I go to a
Sounds
doctor
good.
once a week who basically electrocutes me with something
Nice.
that feels like a jackhammer, except it's a jackhammer shooting electricity. It hurts like hell. And I pay him $300 and say thank you.
Wow. Well, that's
Yeah.
a new fetish that we'll have to explore. So where did you go to college?
I went to Cornell, which is not very far from New York City and is filled with lots of other people from New York City.
So is that why you decided to get out of your comfort zone and travel all these glorious places? Because you thought I've done everything in New York, so I might as well leave.
Well, in truth, I felt like it was a huge hole in my personal life experience that I had never lived anywhere except New York City and Ithaca. And moving to Luxembourg was not at all my idea. My wife came home from work one day and asked me, what would you think of living in Luxembourg? And at the time, I have to admit, I was not 100% positive where Luxembourg was or what it was. I thought it might in fact be like a state in Germany or a city in Germany, but I'd never lived anywhere else. I was 40 years old and we had 2 little kids and I thought, this is terrific. All I have to do is say yes and I get to live in another part of the world. So I said yes and we lived in another part of the world. And while we were there, one of the things we wanted to do was travel a lot, and not just on vacations to places, but like almost every weekend, just get in the car and go somewhere. And it was complicated by having two little kids and a dog, and we couldn't leave any of the three of them behind. And so sort of finding a hotel room that would fit us, that we could drive to and park the car and blah, blah, blah in the center of Bruges was not always the easiest thing to do. But it was such a great experience to just drive around Europe for a year and a half.
Well, in Bruges, you could probably find a space for the dog, but not for the kids.
Yeah, they're very dog friendly in a lot of Europe.
Yeah, when I was there once, there was a dog who took the bus. He would get on the bus and he would take it, and then he'd just decide that's it, and he'd get on another bus and come home.
That's terrific.
That's just such a. Sorry, did they charge him? Probably. But that's just like a typical small town kind of your stuff that happens in Europe story. So did you start thinking about writing internationally set domestic thrillers at that point, or did things like that inspire you?
I started writing in Luxembourg a book about my life as an expat. And as it turns out, my life as an expat was not really interesting enough to become a novel. And so I sat around trying to think about what it is I could do to this story to make it a lot better and a lot more exciting. And Luxembourg is one of the three capitals of the European Union. Half the people who live in Luxembourg City are expats. Every country has a big embassy presence. It's also the private banking capital of the world. This is where spies are. There are spies here. And when I would go to parties at the embassy, there would be spies there. I, of course, don't know who they are. But one day I was sitting in a playground watching my children play on a tall, dangerous climbing apparatus and hope they didn't fall off and break their arms, which one of them eventually did, but not that day. And I was doing the thing that I often do, which is making small talk with a stranger on a park bench. And this woman I was talking to was bizarrely elusive about the facts of her life. When I asked her where they'd lived before Luxembourg, she said something like, "Oh, we got around." What the hell does that mean? And she was just so inept at lying to me. And I thought, wow, she must be a very, very inept spy, or more likely, she is the wife of a spy. And I didn't actually think that she was the wife of a spy, and I never saw her again. But it occurred to me that there are wives of spies or husbands of spies in the playgrounds in Luxembourg, and that my family that I was writing about could become one of those families.
It isn't, you mentioned your child falling. It's really amazing as an American to go to like the Netherlands and see somebody riding their bike at, 70 miles an hour. And they've got groceries in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and their kids strapped to the front of the bike.
Yeah.
They really don't coddle them over there, do they?
No, they don't coddle them, and they don't sue each other. I think that's the thing is they have these playgrounds. You look at a playground in Europe and you think, oh my God, if this were in America, people would never stop suing each other. Obviously, kids are going to fall off of that thing and they're going to break their arms, which did happen to my kids. My kids were constantly getting injured in Luxembourg. All the kids were. And you take them to the hospital and you fix them. It's not like people were dying from these things, but it
builds character,
It does build character.
Right.
You need to
it's not a nanny state in the same way that we are. I think Hanoi is the scariest city for all that I have ever been in, because you would get like 2 or 3 adults and a whole bunch of kids, and they'd be on a scooter and they'd be texting, and and what they would say to you, because there are no traffic lights or they're very rare, and the people would say when you left your hotel, they'd say, just walk into traffic and they'll miss you.
Good plan.
No kidding, really scary. So did you actually go to Lisbon? I assume that you did from the.
Oh yeah. We didn't go to Lisbon when we lived in Luxembourg, which was a while ago, but we were there. I think it was 5 years ago, and it was a terrific trip. And I stayed in a hotel that I loved, and we ate great food everywhere, and we had a fantastic time. And it was a type of hotel where if this room were in Paris, it would cost 10 times more than it cost in Lisbon. It was this great suite overlooking the square to the east with the sun flooding in the morning and everybody out having their breakfast. It was just so perfect in every way, with balconies and everything. And I thought to myself, this is almost too perfect looking of a place. Something bad should happen here. And I sort of love stories that are set up that way, where you look at something, the TV show or the movie or the book or whatever opens with some type of perfection. And then you start chiseling away at that facade, because of course, there really isn't any such thing as perfection. There's only the appearance of it. And that's what I wanted. That's how I wanted this book to unfold. It took me a couple of years before I came up with a plot for it, but I knew that it was going to start off looking perfect in a Lisbon hotel room.
Was
Well,
it the
just-
Avenida Palace?
No, and it was not a fancy hotel. It was not a fancy hotel.
Well, out of curiosity, do you write off the trip then as research, or do you have to write the book and then write it off as research?
Well, Karin, I'll tell you, I write off all of my trips as research, because
They
you never
are.
know. They
People
are.
don't
They always
understand. Yeah,
don't understand. The IRS,
Yes.
I hope, understand. But in
I
truth,
agree.
for a long time, my wife would take the children every summer on a vacation to a fishing camp that her family is members of, about 5 hours north of Toronto. And I went on this vacation once and I disliked everything about it. I don't want to fish. I don't want to be trapped on an island in Canada with people I don't know. I didn't like anything about it. And at the end of that first time we did it, I said, I love that this is an experience you want to have with our children, and you can continue to have it every summer without me. I will do something else. So when they would go to Canada, I would get on a plane with my laptop and I would go to someplace in Europe and I would write. And largely I was doing it to explore and to get ideas, but also I was doing it because for me, nothing has been as productive ever as removing myself from my family and my home and my dog and the place that I live, and just getting rid of my whole life entirely, so that for a week I can immerse myself 100% in thinking about some story and wake up thinking about it, work all day on it, go to sleep thinking about it, think about it when I'm eating lunch and dinner and breakfast. And it's a lot of work that doesn't feel at all like work. And it's an experience that I simply love doing. And I haven't been able to in a couple of years. And for this book, I'd only been to Lisbon the once, and it was for, I think, 5 or 6 nights. And I completely meant to go back and do more research and walk around more. I knew I developed some questions. I knew I wanted to go visit the embassy. I wanted to make an appointment there and talk to some people about some things. And I never got the chance to do it because of COVID. And I sort of kept putting off saying that this book was finished because I was hoping that I could go back to Lisbon. But eventually I realized that I was simply procrastinating. So I turned it in and lived with the fact that I never went back to learn more.
And now you're in beautiful downtown Houston, across from a museum that's closed.
Exactly.
Same difference. Well, so I was talking to Sarah Waters many years ago, and we were talking about the questions that authors usually get. And the first one is, where do you get your ideas, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I steal mine for the most part. And I'm like, yeah, I just lie. But, this seems like you very deliberately got the idea for this book. You knew the setting, but you wrote from a woman's point of view. So what decision making, we should say her name's Ariel Price. What decision making went into how to structure the story? I mean, Barbara emailed me very helpfully and said, boy, I don't envy you. This is a really difficult book to talk about without spoiling everything. So, give away as much as you want. But talk a little bit about it.
I don't really want to give away anything. And this is a problem with talking about this book. But I will say, I love books that look at the beginning like they're about one thing. And then somewhere along the way, you as a reader realize, oh my goodness, this book is not about that at all. This is a book about something completely different. And that sort of paradigm shift, to me, is such a fantastic thing to happen. And it doesn't need to, I'm not talking about a final twist at the end of the book. Like these paradigm shifts, you had a great one, Karin, one that I love so much. It was a couple of books ago for you. What was your
Triptych, My First Will Trent, has a big shift.
Which
I ripped off.
Like on page 20. What was the book before your last book? What was your last book?
False Witness, maybe?
False Witness.
Yeah,
False
yeah.
That was it. And False Witness, you're reading along and it's so clear what's going on in the first few pages of that book. And then boom, all of a sudden there's a giant twist and it's right there at the beginning. And you have other twists over the course of the book, but I remember that one being so specifically as a great place to put one. You don't sort of think of giant paradigm shifts happening like that, where you think you know exactly what's going on in this relationship between these two people in the setup of this story. And you're so completely wrong as a reader. And there's no way to not be wrong. And I found that very satisfying. So I wanted to do that for this book, which as you start reading it, it looks like the setup is a man brings his new wife along with him on a business trip to Lisbon. And she wakes up on the Monday morning after they've had a nice weekend, and he is not in the hotel bed, and he's not answering his phone, and he's not answering his text, and she has no idea where he is. And the beginning of this story is her journey to look for him. And so this book looks like it's a story about a man who goes missing while on a business trip to Lisbon. It looks like a story about a man, and it's not.
So your answer is kind of Sarah's. You stole it from me. Yeah.
If you really need to boil it down simplistically.
When I started reading, though, I was like, oh my God, is this like an update of Frantic? You know, that great Harrison Ford movie?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I love that. So I was like all in for it. And then just there's a lot of shocking stuff that happens that we can't really say.
Well, but that part of wanting it to look like Frantic or wanting it to look like Taken, that was also very deliberate. I think we all come to certain types of stories with expectations about what's going to be going on. And part of the enjoyment of reading those books is either having those expectations fulfilled, but also sometimes having them subverted. And I feel like everybody goes into a story like this looking at the frantic version of it. Of course, that's going to be it. It's so obviously it, but then it turns out not to be.
Right. Well, can we say what it really hinges on? That there's some kind of assault or
no? But we could talk about, I think, how brave a story it is, because it's a very courageous story.
Okay.
And we can certainly say that choosing a female narrator to tell this story, Chris, I thought was a very brave thing to do too. And in a moment in time, which authors are kind of pressured to only write what they what they themselves are, you didn't do that. And good for you, by the way.
Well, thank you. This is a strange moment in time to be a novelist, I think, full stop. And a lot of the choices that people make about what types of stories to tell and what types of stories they want to read are based on things completely different than what the author has in mind. But I've always felt like writing fiction is, in essence, the act of pretending to be somebody else. And if you're writing completely about yourself, it's not a novel, it's a memoir. And if the only fiction that people want to read is autofiction, then our world is going to be very constrained, especially in genre fiction that Karin and I work in, because the whole point of what we do is to write stories that are much bigger than real life. And in order to be much bigger than real life, they have to not be about ourselves, because I'm not going around shooting people and getting shot with fake careers and fake passports and changing my name and living in a foreign country. And if I could only write my own experience, I couldn't write any of this. And none of these books would exist, whether the narrator was a woman or not. This stuff is not based on my real life, as no crime fiction really is. And if all we can do is autofiction, then there's no more crime fiction. And I don't think people want that. I certainly don't.
Well, I mean, first, autofiction sounds really filthy. So how do you feel about like ratings and trigger warnings and things like, I worry about who would get to do the ratings. Like, is it the same people who want to ban books in libraries and trigger warnings? I definitely think I'm like, you feel this way. I know you don't want someone reading your book if they're triggered by certain things, but I also think it should be an option to read the trigger warning, because if you don't want the trigger warning, it gives quite a bit away about the plot, right?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to this. This is one of the things that I'm really torn about. Obviously, I don't think there's any novelist or any sane novelist out there who's writing books with the intention of making readers upset. And I feel like I want people to feel something, but I don't want them to feel traumatized by anything that I've written. But I also don't want to warn people off a book that they might really benefit from reading by pointing out that there's an uncomfortable subject in them. I feel like uncomfortable subjects are largely the point of fiction. And the more that a book makes you feel, the more that it has value in the world. And a lot of those feelings are going to be uncomfortable ones. Most of them are going to be uncomfortable ones. Books that are only about positive emotions are not interesting books. That's not what anybody wants to read. Oh my God, everything is so great. That's not a story. I think stories are always about something challenging happening to the main character, and sometimes that something is going to make people uncomfortable. But I don't know what to do about the idea. Luckily I'm not in charge of the world, so I don't have to decide what to do about trigger warnings and ratings for books. Yeah.
I make it a practice not to deal with them. It comes up when I'm writing reviews and so forth, and I've decided not to cater to any of it. And if we get slammed on Twitter or whatever it is for anything we say, the hell with it. Well, no,
Barbara, if you're not getting slammed on Twitter, you're doing something wrong.
Well, it came up the other night. We were talking about Tony Hillerman, and somebody said, he'd never be allowed to write those books today. And I'm thinking the world would be really poor if we didn't have the Joe Lepore Navajo novels, because, he's not a Navajo, that's not okay with me. So, we soldier on, and I really am gravitate towards books, in fact, where the author writes the story that he or she wants to write, regardless of all that.
Well, I was just
your book, Chris, for example.
I'm very disappointed to learn Ray Bradbury has never actually been to Mars.
Well, there you are.
Yeah. And don't get me started on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You don't want to hear my thoughts. Well, Chris, you're really political in this book, if I can say that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we talked about ideas, but obviously something got in your craw. You want to talk a little bit about that, or does Barbara open the door?
I think there are some aspects of our culture that people refuse to look at because they tie them up with other things. And I feel like there are some subjects that have become political that really should not be political, that have nothing to do with politics, that are simply matters of decency and science. And the fact that one political party feels one way about them and another political party feels another way about them, I think is a vast corruption of what we're supposed to be doing in our world with each other and for each other. And this book addresses one of those things. And this is not about masks, but it has occurred to me that I find it so bizarre that handling the science of the pandemic has turned into a political issue. It seems to me that if anything should not be political, it's medicine, and this is medicine. That's not what this book is about, but to me, this book is about a very similar subject that simply should not be a political thing.
Well, with the monkeypox, I think one guy's going to post about getting it on his penis, and every man on earth is going to line up for a vaccine. Like,
yeah.
They don't care if it's experimental or what, just jack it in.
Yeah.
So
guarding their penises is the answer to solving problems.
Yes. Well, I mean, a lot of the world's problems would be solved, I think. Well, you kind of talked about your globetrotting and using it as an excuse for a tax write-off and all that kind of stuff. What's your favorite city to write about? Don't say Lisbon.
No, it's been Paris. I've written about Paris a couple of times, and the last book was set exclusively in Paris. Parts of, I think, all the other books. I mean, I unlike you, have not written 20. How many books have you written, Karin?
Oh, I don't know. 50? I'm like a tree. If you cut me open, every book's a ring.
This is only my fifth, but I think this is the first one that doesn't take place partially, at least in Paris, which is it's a city that I love writing about. It's a city that I love writing in. That's my favorite place to go write.
It's a wonderful city. We did an event yesterday for a woman who has written a very good novel, as a matter of fact, but sort of almost self-published, all about Baron Haussmann and his renovation of Paris. What he found when Louis Napoleon asked him to do it and how he left it. And the incredible hardships that he wreaked upon people as he tore down, centuries worth of homes and all the rest of it to accomplish it. But, he also managed to clean up the Seine and prevent cholera and put in sewers. And, the Paris we see today actually only really exists from the mid 1860s to a great degree, although he managed to, to work around some of the great monuments. And I think about London, where so much of it was completely flattened in the war.
Yeah.
And then you get the parts that have rebuilt. Hamburg is like that. I mean, there are a lot of cities that have actually, in a way, kind of benefited from calamity because it allowed them urban renewal in a way that would not. But Paris was not from a calamity. Paris was actually, designed.
Planned, yeah.
Yep.
It's a terrific place, and that's not news to anybody, though. And I sort of at the end of the day, I felt like it was almost ridiculous for me to write an international thriller set in Paris, because all the international thrillers are set in Paris, and I feel so much braver, if you will, having set a book in Lisbon, where not everybody has been, and it is an opportunity to take people on an adventure that they can't already see in their own mind. And one of the things that I did in the Paris book was name each of 5 parts for a particular Paris diversion, a landmark in Paris. And I felt like everybody who's reading the book, anybody who's interested in reading an international thriller, knows what these landmarks look like. But
Sure.
I feel differently about Lisbon, that I don't think everybody's going to be immediately able to picture everything that's going on. And I feel like it's more of an adventure than for people to read a book like this. And I also think that it's a little bit more of an adventure, a purposeful adventure in a way, to write a book about this subject with this female protagonist as a man. And that was one of the things that I also was very deliberate about. And in a moment when people are really focused on authors' lived experiences as one of the main criteria for judging a book, I very specifically wanted to do the opposite, because I think if we're only reading books that are very close to the author's experience, then we're always getting exactly what we expect to get. And there are certain types of authors you could tell by the design on the front cover and by the author photo, you don't need to read anything else. You know what's going to be happening in this book. And I think maybe that's satisfying for a lot of people, but I'm not one of those people. I don't want to know everything that's going to be happening in this book. And I want readers to be surprised too. And one of the things I was trying to accomplish here was, in fact, being a man, writing a story that looks like it's a story about a man who looks like me, and then isn't a story about that man at all. And that was very, very deliberate thing. And not to be contrarian, that's not my point here, I'm not thumbing my nose at anybody. I just want people to have the opportunity to be surprised.
Well,
So
but
let me show you the book cover
Sorry, go ahead.
again, because I was going to say one of the interesting things I think about this book. Oh dear, can you hear me? Because my internet looks like it. Am I back?
yeah, I hear you.
Okay, it went unstable for a moment. It's a challenge to figure out how to package a book like this, because I don't know, you both can probably remember the whole chicklet wave. Remember that? When every single cover was a woman's derriere, she was wearing nylons with seams and fuck me pumps. I mean, you absolutely knew what this book was going to be like. But I did think, Chris, that it was kind of a challenge to a designer for them to come up with some kind of a cover, which I like. It's really colorful, and I like, the swirls indicate, various things. What kind of input did you have, if any, into the design of the book?
My input on this book design was, oh my God, I love that so much. Thank you.
Oh, good.
I only saw the one, and I didn't have any tweaks that I asked for. I think they hit it out of the park on the first try, and I was really worried about it. My previous books all had very literal covers with figures on them, where the design was communicating who the protagonist was, even in a way that was, I think, very appropriate for those books. But this book is a different thing. And my request was that please do something that's very different from my previous books. And I know this was not the only cover they came up with, but it was the only one they showed me. I worked in publishing for a long time,
Right.
as an editor, and there was almost nothing worse than covers that went on in cover meetings for months. And that happens a lot. Of the designer tries something and brings it into a meeting, and the publisher and the marketing director and the publicist and the editor all hate it. So, oh my God, this is horrible. So they go back, and a few weeks later, and it could just go on forever. And then they finally get a couple of covers they like, and they send them to the author, and the author explodes. Oh my God, I hate this so much, without even knowing that it took 3 months to get there, and maybe hundreds of tries. So starting from scratch, it can be so painful for everybody involved. And the same is true with titles sometimes, that if a book doesn't show up with the right title, figuring out a title can take longer than writing the goddamn book. Have you ever had that, Karin?
No, my titles are pretty clear, but what I figured out from all my publishers all over the world is they'll say, sales really likes this, right?
Yeah.
And I get like, well, so Dervla, I think you had Dervla, Barbara. So
We
she gets a gal. I get usually a gal running in a jacket in the woods, or like a face. I was like, here, Jennifer Hillier has a good one. Or I'm sorry, Hillerman. Sorry, I should know.
Hillier.
Oh, right.
Yeah. That's that fits with her. But some books, like I love Mary Kay Andrews, and like that is like, what you're getting with there, but you're gonna love it. It's a beach book. I didn't like her title, so I fixed it. But it is really interesting, because they also know what's going to be on the shelf in 4 or 5 months too, right? Especially if it's your publisher, which are between our two publishers, that's almost all the books that are published, right? So they know what's going to be on the shelves and what it's going to look like and what it's going to take for something to stick out. So for a lot of times, I'm just like, I'm not a big fan of orange. I really don't like orange. So usually the one they love the most has a lot of orange in it. And I'm like, okay, do what you're going to do. I have no control over it.
So you don't reject covers? You don't say?
No, because I came from a design background too, and I know that there's a lot that goes into it, unless I really hate it. Now, False Witness, they had a woman, and it was torn down the middle. Let's see if I have it here. But it was like a woman running in the forest, obviously, and it was torn down the middle, right? For duality. And I was like, her butt looks so big because of the tear, right? Because her butt, normally her butt would be like that, but it was moved back because of the tear.
Yeah.
So I kept calling it the big butt jacket until they changed it. And I'm like, I'm the youngest of 3 girls, so I'm really good at that kind of thing. I'm like, hey, if you guys like it, that's great, but it looks like her butt's really big. And then the next one was like, well, are you happy with the big butt jacket? Or is the big butt jacket going to be on the trade paperback? And I just put big butt everywhere. And they were like, you know what? Maybe we should shave that big butt.
I have a question for you. You're a very funny person, and you write extremely dark books that nevertheless manage to always also have humor in them. Is that something you do purposefully? And do you plan it out how frequently you're going to be funny? Or does it just sort of pop up once in a while? I'm going to insert this character who I absolutely loathe for a paragraph so I can make fun of her and then have a good laugh and move on.
Well, normally it's when it feels right, because I do write about a lot of heavy things. And I think if you're just unrelentingly dark, that people are just going to get really depressed and never want to continue reading. So I think you do have some lightness. I don't generally punch down. So it's mostly, Will finds himself in a really ridiculous situation, or Amanda, like my favorite line Will says to Faith when they're first partnering up, you know, I've got 2 testicles and Amanda's got one and Angie has the other one. So you're going to have to talk to them if you want one of them. Right. So, you know, that kind of stuff, which men, that was in a book many years ago, and men will still come up and quote that line to me, which is fantastic, especially when I'm with my family. But you know, I just think it's really important to balance it. And sometimes things are so horrible if you don't laugh at them. Like, I don't know about you, but when they said monkeypox, I laughed hysterically because I'm going to be in London next month. And, you know, and then it was like, and then they say it's in New York and I'm going to be in New York with you next week.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, at this point, if we don't laugh, what's the alternative?
Good
That's
point.
a good point. Yeah.
The hallmark of noir fiction has always been humor. You know, I mean, it's one of the, Patrick, you should come join us because this is your wheelhouse. But it
Put your
always
pants on,
has
Patrick.
been.
Put your pants on, Patrick. He's like,
There he
just a
is.
minute. There he is.
Isn't that true that noir and, you know, really dark stuff has always got humor as part of it?
Oh boy, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean,
That's a
comedy.
Megan Abbott question, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
Megan
yeah.
in there? Can you pull her up?
Well, I mean, there is the whole comedy and tragedy connection, but I don't know. I mean, there's some noir that's pretty unrelentingly bleak, but it's a good question, Barbara. There, I mean, there's also dark humor, of course.
Yeah.
That we.
Cop humor, gallows humor, whatever you want
Yeah.
to call it, you know. But I myself have always thought that Chandler and those guys, you know, they deliberately wrote in some humor to just because
Chandler.
otherwise, you know, you'd never make it to the end of the book. And also it illuminates character in a way that just unrelentingly grim cannot do, you know. So anyway.
Well,
it's
I try
good.
to be funny every once in a while myself. And then I find out, I realize after I've written a first draft, I'm rereading it, that I'm often trying a little too hard. And those are the
Yeah.
things that I need to get rid of. But I do also know, and I think Karin, you might do this too. I give myself the opportunity to put very, very minor incidental characters onto the page, really for no purpose other than a little bit of humor, mostly in the way of absolutely hating these people. And I don't know about you, I find it incredibly cathartic and a great opportunity to be able to just put a douchebag on the page in order to call him that. And I think it's one of the great joys of being a novelist. And I don't think I do that a lot, but I definitely relish it when I do. Do you enjoy writing like that?
Well, so, you know, sometimes when, again, we're not traveling as much as we used to, but a lot of times I'll see people in an airport, which is like the visualization of the internet, because people are just doing the stupidest things.
Yeah.
You know, like, I love that, like, they'll have like these little vegan like lunch packs for their kids, and then their kid runs around and they're like rolling on the floor licking it, you know. Or one time I saw a lot of times people put lotion on their feet, or they'll clip their toenails, stuff like that. I really love when you're sitting down and somebody puts their foot on your armrest from behind. You know, so that's usually where I think of people too. I'll make, like, usually they have a mole or something with a lot of hair, or, you know, I'll think, okay, I'm going to use this rage at your stink foot. I'm gonna put it
Are there
in
any
a novel.
personal details from your own history that make their way into the books in that way? You know, little digs where you get revenge on somebody from your childhood.
Well, I mean, you guys know me pretty well. I'm not like a seek out revenge later person. I'm pretty much going to tell you right then and there. Right.
Right there on the spot. Yeah.
But you have a great worldview. I've known you since before you were an author, and I can remember at our first lunch together at MoMA, you know, that I could already tell that your worldview was different. You know, that you see things that other people don't necessarily see, and you're pretty fearless about, you know, flinging them out there. So it's one of the things I've always, both of you, you know, are brave. I think you're brave writers. You're not just conventional writers. That's one thing I really like about both of your books.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we should say, that was my last question. It's like, I'm looking at these blurbs: Megan Abbott, Maggie Shipstead, Lisa Scottolini, Stephen King. Who did you blow for these, man? Or are you just like pulling your other publishers out saying, and me? Because I know I
I'm
didn't
not going
get
to answer
anything.
that, Karen, for God.
How did I lean
didn't
on
get
you
anything.
exactly?
At least
You didn't
Chris
get
maybe
anything?
send you a steak.
I love it. You know what would be the best thing to do, Chris? And we've done this several times, and it really has been a lot of fun, is that maybe 6 months from now, we do a Zoom event that's basically a book club. And the deal is that you have to have read the book in order, or risk the spoilers in order to come. And every time we've done that, it has been hugely successful and very illuminating for the author. So if you'd like to think about that,
Sure.
I think this is a book nearly impossible to discuss in this context.
True.
And
Yeah,
so I
thanks a
think
lot,
it would
Chris.
really be great, to see how readers have read your book and their reactions to it, given, an opportunity. We would do more of them, except we just don't have enough time to do the new books and, go back and do the old books. But I'd make an exception for this one.
Well,
I
thank
think
you.
it would
That's
be
very
great if people really loved it.
Yeah, I'm not so excited about the idea of getting.
Can you scream for that?
come
'Cause
on.
my first thought was like the one person who really hates
No,
it
no,
is going
no.
to
The
be like,
people- the
I have
people-
something to say.
People who come like it, but besides that, Patrick keeps an iron grip on the comments. So
Oh, good. Okay. All
it's
right.
not demoralizing. And the other thing that's really fun too is that we have such a huge international audience. I mean, Patrick was really excited about 3 weeks ago. He said, we have our first question from Mongolia. I mean,
Wow.
we have a regular in Italy, don't we? And she has amazing questions, very
Yeah.
European questions, I might add.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear the feedback from readers in other countries, because they don't necessarily read the book the way we might, And so that's the best thing about Zoom, is that we have acquired this astonishing international audience. Remember Ursa, when you and Ursa did that event together? Out of the 9,000 people that watched it, something like 150 were American, and everybody else was somewhere else, but a huge number of them were in Scotland. And then she and I did the First Lady of Iceland together. And, First Lady's Canadian and Ursa's in Iceland and we're here. And, it's amazing the kinds of reactions you get from people. I really love Zoom for that it's a whole different world than just, going down to Scottsdale, seeing who shows up and going from there. It's been great. Patrick, do we have questions before we run out of time?
Yeah, let's see. There are a few. Okay, Josette would like to know. She says, Chris, how did you become so adept at writing three-dimensional female characters?
That's a compliment. That's not really a question, because I can't answer it. I don't have an answer to that. I wish that I did, but I don't. I just try to write.
You're right. That is a tough one to
characters.
answer.
And they don't happen to be women. I, for some reason, have been drawn to stories that really can only have women protagonists. And I think I have one book that's really a male protagonist, and the others are mostly women, if not entirely.
Let's see. Okay, a question for both of you guys. What authors have been influential to you over the years?
Karin?
Oh, well, Flannery O'Connor, always. But this gives me a good opportunity to talk about this doorstop.
Mo,
Barbara, have you seen this?
that's the Mo Hader book, right?
It's the Mo Hader book. Yeah. It's the last
I have
book
not
she
seen
wrote.
it, but I knew she died, didn't she, Karen?
She did. Yeah. Yeah. She was, well, first, she was an amazing person. She was just a
Right.
great person. And talk about writing about her lived experience. I mean, she was really so amazing at that. But she's written several novels, and the first one of hers was Birdman.
Right.
And then she wrote something called The Treatment. And it was, if I had to teach someone how to write a thriller, I would make them read The Treatment first and tell me why it works so well. Because if you can figure that out, then you know how to plot a really good thriller. And then after that, she went like in a completely different direction and
Sure
wrote,
did.
yeah. And then she wrote The Devil Named King, which was also called Tokyo here.
An absolutely brilliant book too.
Exactly. And then she wrote a hilarious book called Pig Island that I think was loosely
Oh, great.
based on Mark Billingham. I mean, she just did all kinds of stuff, but this is her last book. It was meant to be a trilogy and it's fantastic. And my copy says signed by the author, but obviously she didn't live to do that. But she's absolutely amazing. So we came up at the same time too. So we got the same kind of shit thrown at us for being women. I mean, she used to be a model, so very, very beautiful. So people were constantly asking, why would you write about violence against women? As if, you know, a pretty woman shouldn't be interested in that kind of stuff. She shouldn't trouble her mind with it. But
Are you
her
a Highsmith
tour,
fan, Karen?
sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna ask, are you a Patricia Highsmith fan?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But most tour, like she was so dinged for writing so unflinchingly. She got this nasty, nasty review in the New York Times. She was literally on a plane when it published, coming here for her US tour. Everything got canceled based on this one person thinking that she shouldn't be writing these books. And so she had like 3 days in New York and then she went home. But that just says a lot about how the world has changed, hopefully, because I don't think that would happen today.
How about you, Chris?
Oh, the question is influences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm amazed constantly at how much my tastes in writing have changed. I'm in reading over the decades that I've been a reader, and I still have a hard time understanding what it is that I liked about some books that I absolutely loved when I was 20 years old. And I can't believe that it's the same human being who liked those books who now like the books that I like to read and write. So it's very hard for me to identify influences on my writing, but I had a very specific experience in the mid 1990s with Pat Conroy that taught me something about not writing, but about being a writer. And I was pretty young. I was 26 years old, I think. And I was a copy editor at Doubleday. And Pat was working on a book called Beach Music that was really, really late and really, really long and went through an extremely aggressive edit. And he was taking an extremely long time to do the work. And so the publisher basically forced him to move to New York and set himself up in a hotel. And he didn't live here and work until this goddamn revision was finished, because it was important to the publisher financially. And it was important to Pat too. It needed to get done. And they needed somebody to sort of babysit him. And that person was me. So for about a month, I didn't go to the office anymore. Instead, I would wake up in my apartment on 75th Street and walk across Central Park to his hotel on 76th Street and knock on the door and make sure that he was there and that he was awake and that he had done something yesterday. And I would take that something from him. It was yellow legal pads. He was rewriting the entire book by hand in chicken scrawl on yellow legal pads. And he was really a great procrastinator and also a great talker. And he liked to leave the hotel with me as soon as I arrived and go for a walk in Central Park. And it was in February and March, and the weather was almost always bad. But as we're walking, he was constantly interviewing me about my life, and he wanted to know everything about everything. And I was trying to get information out of him. He was the famous writer. I was a 26-year-old copy editor. I should have been learning from him, but he wouldn't stop asking me questions. And I asked him one day, and I remember we were walking through the zoo and it was cold and it was raining. And I said, why do you keep asking all these questions about me? And he said, that's the secret to being a novelist. Listen to other people's stories. Listen very, very carefully. And I never forgot that. And I was still a long way away from writing a novel then, but I've always remembered that idea as a way of moving through life. It's listening to people's stories, not just as a way of having conversation, but of really seeing somebody. And then for me, for novelists, I think going ahead and using it later, and hopefully not in a way that people necessarily recognize without their permission, but using something about it, which almost everything I've written about comes from something real. It's not the plot itself isn't real, but the character and some important part of the experience is real. That was a long answer.
It was a wonderful answer.
Great. Yeah. Sounds like you stayed curious, you know, about things to the very end. Yeah.
I wouldn't call it the end.
Well,
A
yeah,
little
bit
later.
longer. Yeah.
Thanks for the encouragement.
I think he meant Conroy, right? But there we go. All right. Anything else, Patrick?
I don't think so. No, that's about it.
All right. Karen, did you have anything else you wanted to say or add?
No, I can't talk about the book or tell you anything about it, but I can say it's a great book and everybody should get it and read it and love it and write Chris love letters.
Thank you. Karen, what's your next book? I guess it's August.
Yes, this one, Girl Running on the Cover, Girl Forgotten. Yes.
Is there anything you want to say about it?
It's a really good book. I had a lot of fun writing it.
Oh, come on, Karen. You can do better than that.
You know, I got to talk to a bunch of marshals, U.S. Marshals, and like men, woman, whatever, they are such dick swingers. I mean, it was such a delight being around them because they're all just like, they're so confident. And if you know what kind of training you have to go through to be a U.S. Marshal, you think, yeah, you should be that confident. I mean, it's pretty amazing what the training and the physical training they have to go to is just brutal. It sounds like Navy SEAL stuff. So fortunately, I didn't have to do that, but I got to hear about it and live it vicariously. But marshals do a lot of really interesting things. So that was extremely fun to meet those guys and women and talk to them about how they look at the world and what their job is.
Do you
Are there any
that
dogs
being
or
a
cats in this
novelist-
novel?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Are there any dogs or cats in this novel?
Well, yeah. And I got like one of my favorite hotel names of all times because it's on in a coastal town. It's called Beach Please.
All right, that's terrific. I think that's a good way to end.
It's a very good way to end. We'll have kittens once again at your event, which will be fabulous.
I shall be
Thank
there.
you. Thank you very much for spending time with us. We sure appreciate it. Our copies of 2 Nights in Lisbon are heading in our direction as we speak. So if you'd like to buy an autographed book, and we strongly urge you to do so, this is our June crime book of the month at the Poison Pen because it's so wonderful. So anyway, do buy one. Thanks very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so
Bye.
much, everybody.